Welcome to the 35th reading of my memoir, The Innocence of Guilt. Tensions with my mother. During one of the almost daily altercations between my father and me, he blurted out, "I know what your problem is. You've got an inferiority complex." And with that statement, he stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. I'd never heard of an inferiority complex, but it certainly sounded serious enough for me to check it out. Mum bought magazines, Woman's Weekly and Woman's Own, and in one of those I saw an advertisement entitled, "How to Get Rid of an Inferiority Complex." The information cost nothing, so I sent away for it. A discreet brown paper envelope arrived in the post, and I raced upstairs with it, tore it open, only to find that in order to cure the condition, I had to send a considerable amount of money over a considerable period of time for a lengthy course of treatment. The useless information thrown away, off I went to the public library, headed for the psychology section to discover more about my newly diagnosed condition. I spent several evenings sitting on the floor up in a corner, browsing through books. By the time I finished, I knew I was flawed. As well as the inferiority complex, I was maladjusted, disturbed, and quite possibly a juvenile delinquent. Far too embarrassed to borrow the books, I left empty-handed in more ways than one. Being only 14 years old, I didn't know how to put me right. Many evenings alone in the house, anger and sadness swept over me until I didn't know how to contain it without exploding. Many times I cried and cried, hoping that somebody up there would hear me, but if they ever did, they weren't letting me know. The comforting light that visited me during my childhood twinkled no more. Silence all around me proved the world had shut me out. My sole companion at those times, my mother's dog, Chips. I harbored no particular affection for him, although he had never harmed me. One evening he made a move to come out of his wooden box in the corner, and I treated him to one of Dad's famous glares. He retreated, attempted to leave the box again, then retreated once more when I repeated the glare. I realized he was afraid of me. Satisfied with the power over him, I played a cruel game, never letting him move any more than a few inches. I knew it was wrong, but it was as if the poor dog took on the role of all the people who had ever hurt me, and I punished him with all the pain inflicted on me. Afterwards, I lay in bed, ashamed at my behavior, the pain still with me. I imagined myself the most miserable, wretched being in the world to do such a thing. No wonder nobody loved me. As my brother grew older and less inclined to want me tagging along, I spent more and more time with my mother during the summer holidays. Nothing to do, nowhere to go, the holidays an endless succession of monotonous days. David's friends, a group of 5 or 6 boys, showed up daily on the doorstep, and off he went, presumably on some adventure. Mum and I trudged around the shops. Pleasant when I was a small child, but not anymore. Mum chatted to all the shopkeepers, with a familiarity suggesting they'd known her since the beginning of time, knew what she wanted before she even opened her mouth to ask. We always stopped in Woolworths before heading home. This I didn't mind, as we ended up perched on the high swivel counter stools at the refreshments bar for a bap, a floury bread roll spread with butter, cup of tea for Mum, an OXO drink for me. Before the treat, however, I endured my mother sharing her entire life with the lady behind the cake counter over the purchase of a slab of Madeira. I wanted to shrink to some minuscule size and escape the embarrassment she caused me. "Just buy the cake, Mum, and let's go get a bap," I whispered, but it did no good. She could talk all afternoon to the cake lady, and I might as well have evaporated into thin air for all the notice she took of me. Fairly regularly she took me to St. Martin's Church halfway up our hill and made me climb over the wrought iron railings to pick dandelions growing profusely in the graveyard. The church had closed and a sign outside forbade entry. The dandelions, food for my tortoise, Joey. Jerry had died some time ago. "Come on, girl, over you go before somebody comes and catches us," she urged. I shook with fear while Mum kept an eye open for anyone walking past. I told her we shouldn't be doing it. "Don't be silly. They're only dandelions, not the crown jewels," she muttered. Another place we furtively visited was High Woods, where Mum picked armfuls of beautiful wild bluebells to bring home and decorate the house. All around the outside of the rickety, easily broken into fence surrounding the woods were "Trespassers will be prosecuted" signs. Still, Mum had been cheated of her flower garden. She didn't see what harm it would do to anyone if she helped herself to a few wild flowers, when the daily view from her living room window consisted of an ugly dirt patch and the solid block of a sewing factory. Despite her apparent willingness to break all the rules outside the four walls of our house, she held to a rigid routine inside it, and this led to a lot of friction between us. The British Good Housekeeping Institute had developed a system to help housewives budget their time. A schedule for every day of the week except Sunday. Maybe my mother adhered to something similar because she drove me crazy with her rules for when certain things should be done or not done. The whole row of houses, and indeed the whole street most likely, agreed to Monday being the only day acceptable to hang your washing on the line. If it rained, you put up with wet clothes hanging around inside the house. You didn't dare put them out the next day. Armed with the school nurse's talk on personal hygiene to all the girls in the gym, I had come home with a big announcement: a clean pair of knickers every day. Mum said that was all right for the school nurse, but she wasn't the one doing the washing for a family of 5 and all by hand too. She forbade me to wash my own knickers, but I barged past her, setting myself up in the scullery where I boiled up water in the kettles. Not much she could do, as physical force wasn't her usual line of retaliation. She'd only struck me once, and the look of horror on her face afterwards hurt me far more than the slap she administered out of frustration. She also tried to prevent me hanging my washing on the line, other than Mondays, but I rebelled and did it anyway. Her remark that the neighbours would knock on the door and complain caused me to yell, "Let them come!" But they didn't. Maybe they heard all the shouting going on and thought better of it. The chamber pots kept underneath each bed were emptied and cleaned every day. I never questioned the need for the regularity of that. Mum tackled the bedrooms once a week on Fridays. I shared a room with my brother, so other than hanging a curtain between the beds, which she would not agree to, privacy didn't exist. No special day for baking, but Mum was very possessive about her scullery. I didn't get in there too often, which brings me to the next conflict. Tradition in our family designated Friday as strip wash night because we had no bathroom. Embarrassing because if I happened to be out in the street, Dad left the house and yelled out at full throttle for me to come in and get my wash. The strip wash ritual involved a steamy scullery with kettles going full blast, boiling endless amounts of water. An enamel bowl sat on the living room table, and beside it I partially stripped off so that Mum could wash each body part. At 14 years of age, I detested this. Din Din sat in his chair with the newspaper held up against his face, but still I suffered exposure. My brother I suspected of sneaking a peek or two to maybe pass on to his friends. Sometimes my father sat on the other side of the table, although he usually took off to the factory, where he spent much of his time. I told Mum I wanted to use the scullery to wash in and would look after myself in future. Did that ever start off something between us? She protested vehemently, and I protested back. She said there was only one way out to the back garden, through the scullery door to get to the lavatory, and what if Din Din suddenly needed to go? I said that I'd let him, and as I didn't hear any protests from him, I promptly walked out and barricaded myself into the scullery by pushing a chair against the interior living room door. Being in the scullery wasn't exactly spa heaven. The small amounts of water I heated soon cooled in the time it took to shave my legs. I propped one leg up on the wooden chair and tried to maintain enough lather to do the job while the water ran down my leg onto the floor. The small thin towel was drenched by the time I'd finished one leg. Still, Mum kept calling out, "Are you going to be in there all night?" I still needed to wash the rest of myself and reheat the water. By the time I finished, she complained bitterly that I'd ruined her gas top by spilling water all over it, almost burned out her kettles, forgotten to open the window to let the steam out, allowing water to run down the walls, and left pools all over the floor. No wonder I jumped at every opportunity to go to a friend's house with the luxury of a bathroom. I never once heard my brother asking to use the salubrious accommodations of our scullery, so maybe he still used the bowl on the table. Thank you for listening. Please feel free to subscribe, like, or comment on this reading. And hopefully you will tune in to the next one. Bye for now.